You know, there are times where you just gotta feel really bad for the guy whose job it is to deliver bad news to Vladimir Putin. And especially over the past couple of weeks or so, you gotta feel bad not just for that guy, but for his family, who is probably praying desperately right now that he can stay away from open windows long enough, at least to get out of the country. And that's because over the past couple of weeks or so, Russia has gotten nothing but bad news. And not just the normal bad news of them getting decimated in pretty much every front on the war, but also really terrible news when it comes to Russia's ability to project power on the globe through the number one tool they've been using throughout their war in Ukraine, which is their nuclear threats. Because over the past couple of weeks, Russia's capacity to issue nuclear threats has just simply been annihilated. It was literally just a couple of days ago that we were all talking about how Russia's nuclear fleet in the Pacific had been hit by tsunami waves, which appeared to have done rather critical damage to the facilities that house the nuclear fleet, and untold damage potentially to the fleet itself. When we look at satellite imagery of this base, we can see that a pier was actually split in half, confirming that the base, even though it seems to be well protected, was in fact hit by tsunami waves, damaging not just the pier in the satellite imagery, but also likely a whole lot of other small things that are difficult to quantify, and that of course Russia will never release the details of. But in a series of events that would just be mind-boggling if it happened to any other nation on the planet, but that in a kind of a sad and funny way we've just sort of come to expect when it comes to Russia, this massive event now seems to just be a sideshow act, compared to what has happened today as I'm recording this video, where Ukraine has humiliated the Kremlin, humiliated the nation of Russia as a whole, and really decimated Russia's ability to ever project forces and nuclear power in the way they once had, by stealing the plans to Russia's top secret, world-class, top-of-the-line, new nuclear submarines. Now, anybody who knows anything about submarine warfare knows that the entire purpose of a submarine is to shroud your country's most critical activities in a high level of secrecy. It's actually the entire point of having a submarine in the first place, where a submarine goes below the ocean waters where it cannot be easily seen or detected, giving a level of ambiguity as to your options and what you could do as a country, particularly with nuclear submarines. Without these traits, without secrecy, submarines are not much more useful than a surface-level vessel, a surface-level naval vessel that can be easily spotted and predicted, etc. And we've all already seen just how useful Russia's Navy's surface-level vessels are, getting pretty much incapacitated completely in the Black Sea by Ukraine that does not even have a navy. If your submarines lose secrecy, what you have is a very expensive weapon, one of the most expensive weapons in the entire military, that has now basically lost its purpose. This is now exactly what has happened to Russia, as Ukraine has managed to get their hands on, before these subs have even launched and gone on their first missions, all of the relevant information about these subs, making them basically dead in the water until Russia can remedy these issues, if they can remedy these issues. Ukraine got everything. They got everything from operational schedules telling them when and where the subs are supposed to be operating, meaning Russia now has to change all of those things. Ukraine got engineering reports about the status of the systems on the subs. They got schematics showing the detailed diagrams of specific systems on the subs, including the survivability equipment, basically showing all of the potential weaknesses of these submarines and how they can be exploited. But even more than that, Ukraine also got detailed information even about the crews of the subs. Detailed information all the way down to the fitness levels of individual members of the crew. And this is a catastrophic blow to Russia for so many reasons. For example, if we just look at the crew list piece of this equation, in any competent country, losing access to this information would probably cause them to seriously consider docking those subs until further notice. Because when you have people who have access to not just a couple of different crew members, but the entire crew list for all of your subs, you now have a huge amount of people that the enemy knows about to approach for corruption. where these people can be paid off or motivated in a number of other ways to sabotage their own machines or to turn against their comrades in one of any other number of ways. This would be the case in any country. You don't mess around when it comes to your nuclear assets. But it's got to be especially the case when it comes to Russia. Not only because, obviously, their nuclear subsystems have already specifically been infiltrated and the enemy could be doing who knows what in and around this part of your military, but also because we already know that the Russian military is extremely prone to corruption. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we already saw how corruption largely caused them to basically fail in their efforts. Where men, in many cases, were equipped with fake gear and adequate supplies at every level of the military. We had people doing petty theft. We had generals doing actual fake orders of equipment so that the people who arrived at the front lines did not have access to the real gear they needed to accomplish their mission. And in a country like Russia, where you have previously been so thoroughly infiltrated, to know that the enemy is in your subsystems and probably doing the best they can to talk to and recruit every single member of your submarine crews, that has got to give you serious pause, and I would not be surprised if Russia had to postpone any operations they had planned for this new nuclear fleet until they can completely replace all of these crews. And even then, there's got to still be a question mark at the top of their minds. However, the good thing about a crew is that no matter how long it takes, at least you can theoretically completely change them. The same is not true at all about any other aspect of these new Russian submarines, unless Russia just completely has to come up with a brand new sub model. And that's because, as I said, Ukraine has already accessed critical information about these subs that will reveal their weaknesses. Not just the specific information about their survivability systems, but also their operational schedules, which shows you how Russia intended to use them and where you would likely be to find them in the future, and also detailed information about their combat operations and basically their protocols. And because those things are specific to these submarines, Russia can try to change some things around, but they're not going to be able to change them completely. And even if they can change some things around, they might be forced to adopt suboptimal protocols just so that they have something that the enemy doesn't know exactly what their next move is going to be in every situation. All of this makes it so that when Russia does eventually deploy these submarines, their usefulness will be many degrees lower than it could have been had this information not been leaked. And with the enemy knowing exactly what they're going to do under combat situations, it is going to give any country that is an opponent of Russia, particularly in the nuclear arena, many advantages that Russia will not possess over them. This is incredibly damaging to Russia on its own, but it's also incredibly damaging when you consider that this is not the only vulnerability that has now been opened up when it comes to Russia's nuclear capabilities. We've already seen, as I mentioned, the Tsunami hit on Russia's nuclear base in the Pacific. Even if it's minor damage, it is damage, and that removes some capabilities. We've already seen how Ukraine has in Operation Spiderweb taken out a good portion of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, and even if that fleet still exists, it doesn't exist to the same level that it once did. We've also seen over the past year Russia attempting and failing many ballistic missile launches, causing there to be very open questions about Russia's ability to launch nuclear weapons in that arena as well. And so what we see with all of these components together is that all three aspects of Russia's nuclear triad, land, sea, air, have been hit. They have been crippled. And that means that Russia no longer has nearly the same level of strategic ambiguity when it comes to them making nuclear threats against, for example, the United States. Not that I ever thought that Russia would ever launch nukes in the first place, but at least in the United States, people took those threats very seriously, probably more seriously than they should have, and it prevented them from taking certain steps, for example, when it came to supporting Ukraine. And now Russia's ability to make those threats is severely diminished. Specifically when it came to these new nuclear vessels, these were supposed to be a super weapon that Russia could use to basically go under the sea ice and sit there forever and come up at any time to launch a nuclear missile to hit the United States. And they were also supposed to be equipped with these super special Poseidon missiles that Russia could use to actually trigger tsunamis and hit, for example, U.S. cities, something that they have actually threatened to do on Russian state TV. Now Russia has lost the ambiguity around these weapons, probably the ability to even deploy these weapons, and that makes their threats look really null and void. I've already analyzed in videos in the past how even under perfect conditions, Russia would be exceedingly unlikely to ever launch a nuke, because even under perfect conditions, them launching a nuke results in basically their utter destruction with very little they can do about it, and that is under perfect conditions. Now we find Russia in a situation that is far from perfect conditions, and it is not just speculation and people making logical conclusions about the state of Russia's nuclear capabilities now, but it is actual hard data in several events hitting every aspect of Russia's nuclear capabilities, basically making Russian nuclear threats null and void, which is why kind of for the first time we finally see the United States acting all big and tough against Russia when it comes to nukes, acting like we are super strong and we are going to stand up to this threat. Never mind the fact that these same people who are now standing strong were openly saying how we shouldn't support Ukraine because Russia has nuclear weapons about a year ago. But hey, at least things have changed now. At least they feel comfortable enough to make the right decisions. Even more than this, when it comes to Russian nuclear subs in particular, some of their main power is the fear factor, where Russia wants a lot of secrecy around these subs so that they can project apocalyptic capabilities to basically scare countries in the West, especially the United States, to not want to support countries like Ukraine, thinking that doing so risks nuclear annihilation. A lot of this fear, of course, rests in the secrecy, and in you not knowing what the monster actually looks like. As you'll know if you've ever watched a scary movie, one of the things they never do early on is show a full picture of the actual monster. Because once you actually see this thing that you've only been seeing hints of for a long time, it actually becomes considerably less scary, and you start to understand its actual capabilities and how it can actually be defeated. The same is true of secretive military tech. However, the significance of this event is not limited to Russia's nuclear capabilities. Not by any means. And in fact, probably the main significance of this event is what can be extrapolated beyond the obvious. We've talked a lot about how what Ukraine has infiltrated here is basically the most top secret information that exists in a military. It would be hard to find information that was less well protected than this. And that is a fact in and of itself that is extremely important, because what Ukraine has demonstrated by making this move and releasing this information is that they can hit Russia anywhere. And in fact, maybe they haven't just hit them anywhere, maybe they have hit them everywhere. And now every single Russian soldier is going to be asking themselves the question, before I make a move, does Ukraine already know exactly what I'm going to do? That is going to cause a lot of problems within the Russian military in and of itself. But it also reveals that Ukraine is probably plugged in a whole lot of areas, meaning that they have incredible information guiding the decisions that they're making on the battlefield today. More than likely, the targets that they are choosing to hit are the most strategic possible targets among an incredible amount of information that they have to choose from. And this shows Russia's vulnerability in a way that could ultimately cause them to lose the war. Once you have completely lost your ability to control your own intelligence like this, and even if that perception is there, your military is going to have serious problems from here on out. Russia already had a lot of problems when it came to this. Now those problems are going to be amplified times 100. More than anything, though, what Ukraine has shown by making this move is that they are a good strategic ally. Ukraine hitting this target, if you really think about it, at least on its surface level, is not really beneficial to Ukraine at all. Russia is not threatening Ukraine with nukes. Ukraine has been at war with Russia for over 3 years now. Russia has not used a nuclear weapon yet. They're not likely to do it now. Ukraine really, as far as Russia's navy is concerned, the navy is not a severe threat to Ukraine itself. Russia's navy, instead, is only a perceived threat to Ukraine's allies. And so, by Ukraine making this step against aspects of Russia's military that are a little bit more irrelevant to their own operations, they are really throwing a bone to allies like the United States, saying, look, you provide help to us, we provide things to you, that only we can provide. Only we can provide intelligence of this quality when it comes to Russia, because we are culturally similar to Russia, even though we're not the same as Russia. We can get guys into Russia in any position, no problem. We can get all the information we need, and we can provide countries like the United States, but also other countries within Europe, the information that you need to keep yourselves safe if you continue to support our war efforts. That is a symbiotic relationship that the United States really needs to understand. Ukraine understands it very well. The United States has had sort of a bad attitude throughout the entire war about supporting Ukraine, acting like they are getting nothing in return. And Ukraine is showing by hitting targets like this and providing intelligence like this that they can provide a whole lot of value. And I am sure that if Ukraine is providing intelligence like this publicly, they are providing a whole lot of more valuable information behind the scenes that we will never even know about. If you enjoyed this video, if you got something of value from it, would you please like the video and subscribe to the channel? That's completely free, but it helps me out a lot. And if you'd like to support the channel more, there are a couple of links in the description by which you can do so. I don't expect that from anybody, but it does help me out a lot. YouTube ad revenue is not the most consistent source of income, and viewers like you who consistently help support me are what makes my consistent work on this channel possible. Thanks so much for those who choose to support my work. Be sure to check out one of these videos on screen. I'll see you on the next one.